Marcus Chun had always believed that doing the right thing would eventually pay off. Standing in his supervisor's office at the construction site, watching Mr. Henderson's face turn red with anger, that belief was being tested in the worst possible way. "You left your post to help some vagrant?" Henderson's voice cracked like a whip across the cramped office. "Do you have any idea how much equipment went missing while you were playing Good Samaritan?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his hard hat tucked under his arm. "Sir, she was injured. I couldn't just walk past someone who needed help. She was probably part of the theft ring." Henderson slammed his hand on the desk, making his coffee mug jump. $3,000 worth of copper wiring gone. The cameras show you abandoning your security rounds right before it happened. The memory of the previous night flashed through Marcus's mind. He had been making his usual patrol around the downtown construction site when he heard the sound, a soft whimpering coming from the alley between two buildings. Most people would have kept walking, especially at 2 a.m. in that part of the city. But Marcus had been raised by a grandmother who taught him that ignoring someone's pain was the fastest way to lose your soul. He had found her collapsed behind a dumpster, her clothes torn and dirty, blood seeping from a gash on her forehead. In the dim streetlight, she had looked so fragile, so lost. Her skin had an unusual pale quality that he attributed to shock or blood loss. Her eyes, when she briefly opened them, seemed to reflect the light strangely, but Marcus had been too concerned with getting her help to think much about it. "I called an ambulance," Marcus said, meeting Henderson's glare. "I stayed with her until the paramedics arrived. I did what any decent person would do. Decent people don't cost me money." Henderson's face was now purple. "You're fired, Chun. Clear out your locker and get off my site." Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. This job had been his lifeline after 6 months of unemployment. The night security position at Henderson Construction wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep his small apartment and put food on the table. At 32, with no college degree and a spotty work history, finding another job wouldn't be easy. "Mr. Henderson, please. I've been reliable for 8 months. This was one incident too many. Security guard who doesn't secure things isn't much of a security guard, is he?" Henderson was already turning back to his paperwork. "Sarah will cut your final check. Don't let the door hit you on the way out." 20 minutes later, Marcus walked through the site gates for the last time, his few personal belongings in a cardboard box. The morning sun felt harsh on his face, and the city seemed louder, more hostile than it had just an hour earlier. He thought about calling his grandmother, but she was 93 and living in a nursing home. The last thing she needed was to worry about her grandson being unemployed again. As he waited at the bus stop, Marcus replayed the previous night over and over. The woman had whispered something to him just before the ambulance arrived, but he couldn't make sense of it. The words had sounded foreign, almost musical, definitely not English or any other language he recognized. Her hand had gripped his with surprising strength for someone so injured, and her eyes had locked onto his with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Thank you," she had said clearly in accented English, just before the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." At the time, Marcus had thought it was just the grateful words of someone in shock. Now, jobless and facing an uncertain future, those words fell hollow. Kindness didn't pay rent. Kindness didn't put food on the table. Maybe Henderson was right. Maybe he was just too soft for this world. The bus arrived with a wheeze of brakes and a cloud of diesel exhaust. As Marcus climbed aboard, fishing for exact change, he noticed something odd. Every person on the bus was staring at him. Not casual glances, but intense, focused stares. The businessman in the expensive suit, the elderly woman with her shopping bags, the teenager with headphones around his neck. All of them were looking directly at him. Marcus found an empty seat near the back, trying to shake off the paranoid feeling creeping up his spine. It was probably nothing. People stared for all sorts of reasons. Maybe he had something on his face, or maybe carrying a cardboard box made it obvious he'd just been fired. But as the bus pulled away from the curb, Marcus caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the window that made his blood run cold. Standing on the sidewalk where he had just been waiting was a figure in a dark coat, too far away to make out clearly, but somehow familiar. The figure raised one hand in what might have been a wave, or might have been something else entirely. Marcus blinked, and when he looked again, the figure was gone. But the feeling of being watched remained, settling over him like a heavy blanket as the bus carried him toward an uncertain future. He had no idea that his act of kindness the night before had set in motion events that would change not just his life, but the fate of his entire species. The other passengers continued to stare, and Marcus began to wonder if losing his job was going to be the least of his problems. 3 days after losing his job, Marcus was beginning to think his paranoia might be justified. The staring hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten worse. At the grocery store, the cashier had stared at him so intently while ringing up his meager purchases that she forgot to ask for payment. When Marcus reminded her, she had simply waved him away, her eyes never leaving his face. At the coffee shop where he'd gone to use the free Wi-Fi while job hunting, the barista had given him a large expensive drink instead of the small black coffee he'd ordered, refusing to take his money. "It's on the house," she had said, her voice oddly distant. "For your service." Marcus had tried to explain that he wasn't military and had never served anyone, but the barista had already moved on to the next customer, leaving him confused and caffeinated. Now, sitting in his apartment with his laptop open to job search websites, Marcus was starting to connect dots he didn't want to connect. Every person who stared at him with that strange intensity seemed to know something he didn't. They treated him with a reverence that made no sense, like he was someone important instead of an unemployed security guard eating ramen noodles for the 3rd day straight. His phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number. "Hello. Is this Marcus Chun?" The voice was professional, crisp, with a slight accent he couldn't place. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Dr. Sarah Vega. I'm calling from Metropolitan General Hospital. You were present when a Jane Doe was brought into our emergency room 3 nights ago. We'd like to speak with you." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Is she okay?" "The woman I found." There was a pause. "Could you come to the hospital, Mr. Chun? There are some things we need to discuss that will be better handled in person." An hour later, Marcus found himself in a sterile conference room at Metropolitan General, facing Dr. Vega and 2 other people who hadn't introduced themselves but looked like they'd stepped out of a government handbook. One was a stern-faced woman in a navy suit, the other a man with graying temples who kept taking notes on a tablet. "Mr. Chun," Dr. Vega began, "we need to ask you about the woman you helped. What exactly did you see that night?" Marcus recounted the events as he remembered them, leaving out his growing paranoia about being stared at. The 3 listeners exchanged glances that made him increasingly uncomfortable. "You said she spoke to you," the woman in the suit interjected. "Can you remember her exact words?" "She thanked me. Said something in another language first, then thanked me in English. Told me my kindness wouldn't be forgotten." Marcus looked between them. "Why? What's this about?" The man with the tablet leaned forward. "Mr. Chun, I'm Agent Phillips with a government task force that deals with unusual situations. The woman you helped wasn't exactly human." Marcus laughed, but it came out forced and hollow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Dr. Vega opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. "This is an X-ray of her skeletal structure. Notice anything unusual?" Marcus stared at the image. Even with his limited medical knowledge, he could see the differences. The bone density was far greater than normal, the structure of the ribs was wrong, and there seemed to be additional organs that didn't belong in a human torso. "She's what we call an extraterrestrial refugee," Agent Phillips said matter-of-factly. "Her ship crashed in the mountains about a week ago. She's been evading capture ever since." "Capture?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "By who?" "Not by us," the woman in the suit said. "We're the good guys. There are others of her kind here, and not all of them are friendly. Some see humans as expendable." Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. "You're telling me aliens are real, and I accidentally helped one?" "You didn't accidentally help her," Dr. Vegas said gently. "You made a choice to help someone in need. That choice has had consequences you couldn't have imagined." Agent Phillips tapped his tablet. The woman you helped is named Zara. She's part of a resistance movement fighting against an invasion force that's been planning to colonize Earth for decades. Her people have been studying human society, learning our weaknesses, preparing for conquest. But some of them, the woman in the suit continued, like Zara, believe humans deserve a chance to prove themselves worthy of survival rather than simply being exterminated or enslaved. Marcus's mouth fell dry. What does this have to do with me? Zara performed what her people call a marking on you, Dr. Vega explained. It's a psychic imprint that identifies you as someone under her protection. That's why people have been treating you differently. Other aliens in the city can sense the marking. They know you're important to Zara, which makes you important to their mission. There are others here? In the city? Agent Phillips nodded grimly. Hundreds. They've been infiltrating human society for years, preparing for the main force to arrive. But Zara's resistance has been feeding us information, helping us identify the infiltrators and prepare defenses. Marcus stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're asking me to believe that helping an injured woman has somehow made me part of an alien resistance movement? We're not asking you to believe anything, the woman in the suit said. We're telling you what's happening whether you believe it or not. Zara specifically requested to see you. She says you're crucial to stopping the invasion. How could I possibly be crucial to anything? I'm a security guard who just got fired. Dr. Vega smiled sadly. Sometimes the most important people are the ones who seem ordinary. Zara's people have been studying human society for decades, looking for weaknesses to exploit. But they've also been studying human strengths, acts of selfless kindness, the willingness to help strangers at personal cost. These are qualities that her people value highly. Your willingness to help Zara when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose has convinced her that humanity deserves to survive, Agent Phillips added. She wants to meet with you, to propose an alliance between humans and her resistance faction. Marcus sank back into his chair. And if I say no, then the invasion proceeds as planned, and humanity faces extinction or enslavement, the woman in the suit said bluntly. But if you say yes, if you're willing to work with Zara and her people, we might have a chance to turn the tide. Marcus stared at the X-ray photograph still lying on the table. 48 hours ago, his biggest worry had been finding a new job. Now he was apparently being recruited to help save the human race. When do I meet her? He asked quietly. The three officials exchanged satisfied glances. Tonight, Dr. Vegas said. But, Marcus, you need to understand, once you take this step, there's no going back to your old life. Everything changes from here. Marcus thought about his empty apartment, his depleted bank account, his lack of prospects. Then he thought about the woman named Zara, bleeding and broken in an alley, and how she had looked at him with such gratitude for a simple act of human decency. It already has changed, he said. Let's do this. The meeting was set for midnight in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As Agent Phillips drove through the dark streets, Marcus stared out the window at a world that suddenly felt alien despite being the only home he'd ever known. Every person walking on the sidewalk could be one of them. Every face in a passing car might belong to an extraterrestrial infiltrator planning humanity's destruction. How long have you known? Marcus asked, breaking the silence. About the aliens? About 5 years, Phillips replied, taking a sharp turn into an industrial district. About the planned invasion? 3 years. About Zara and the resistance? 8 months. And you couldn't warn people? Couldn't prepare? Phillips let out a bitter laugh. Prepare how? Tell the world that shape-shifting aliens have been living among U.S., planning to harvest our planet? You saw how easily you accepted it, and you had physical evidence. Imagine trying to convince Congress or the UN without proof they couldn't dismiss as fake. The warehouse loomed ahead, a dark mass against the starlit sky. Phillips parked behind the building and led Marcus through a maze of shipping containers to a side entrance. Inside, the space was larger than Marcus had expected, filled with equipment that looked like a cross between high-tech computers and abstract art sculptures. Welcome to our primary safe house, Philip said, gesturing to the alien technology. Zara's people have been helping us set up defensive systems and communication networks that the invasion force can't detect or jam. A figure stepped out from behind one of the larger machines, and Marcus's breath caught. It was definitely the woman he had helped, but she looked completely different. Her injuries had healed with impossible speed, and her pale skin now had a subtle, luminescent quality. Her eyes, which he had thought were reflecting the streetlight, actually seemed to generate their own soft glow. "Marcus Chun," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his chest. "I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said, finding his voice. Anyone would have done the same thing. Zara's expression grew sad. "No, they would not. We have tested your species extensively over the past decades. Acts of genuine altruism, helping strangers at personal cost, are far rarer among humans than your stories and myths suggest. Most humans help others only when there is social pressure or potential reward." She gestured for him to follow her to a table where holographic displays showed what looked like star maps and tactical information. "This is why the Dominion believes humanity should be eliminated rather than enslaved. You are seen as too unpredictable, too chaotic to be reliable servants. The Dominion? The force planning to invade your world. They are a confederation of species that has conquered hundreds of worlds across this galaxy. They absorb useful traits from conquered species and eliminate the rest." Marcus studied the holographic displays, trying to make sense of the alien symbols and diagrams. "What makes humans special enough that some of you want to save us?" Zara touched the display, and the image shifted to show Earth surrounded by a complex network of lines and nodes. "Your capacity for growth. Most species reach a plateau in their development and remain static for millennia. Humans have advanced technologically and socially at an unprecedented rate. In just 200 years, you went from simple agriculture to space flight. That kind of adaptability is extremely rare. But that's also why the Dominion fears you," Phillips added from across the room. "Rapid growth means unpredictability. They prefer to conquer species they can understand and control." Zara nodded. "My faction believes that humanity's unpredictability is precisely why you should be preserved. The galaxy needs species that can grow, change, and find new solutions to old problems. We have been fighting the Dominion for centuries with little success because we think in patterns they understand. Humans think differently." Marcus looked around the warehouse at the alien technology and government agents, feeling completely out of his depth. "So what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm not a soldier or a scientist. I'm just a guy who helps people sometimes." "That is exactly what we need," Zara said, her glowing eyes focusing intently on him. "The marking I placed on you does more than identify you to my people. It creates a psychic link that allows limited communication and sharing of knowledge. Through this link, I can teach you to use our technology and understand our tactics. But more importantly, you can teach us to think like humans." She moved to another display that showed a three-dimensional map of the city, red dots scattered across it like a rash. "These are confirmed Dominion infiltrators. They have been positioning themselves in key locations: power plants, communication centers, government buildings, military installations. When the main invasion force arrives in 6 weeks, these agents will simultaneously disable your planet's defenses." 6 weeks. Marcus felt his knees go weak. "The advanced scouts have been accelerating their timeline," Phillips explained grimly. "Something spooked them. Probably Zara's escape and subsequent contact with us." Zara touched Marcus's shoulder, and he felt a strange tingling sensation that seemed to travel directly to his brain. "Through our link, I can share with you the locations and identities of every infiltrator. But eliminating them requires human operatives who can move through your society without attracting attention. My people are still learning to perfectly mimic human behavior. We're close, but not perfect." "You want me to hunt down alien spies," Marcus said, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. We want you to coordinate human resistance cells that can identify and neutralize infiltrators while appearing to be ordinary citizens, Phillips corrected. You would be the primary liaison between Zara's people and our human operatives. Marcus walked away from the group, needing space to process what they were asking. Through the dirty windows of the warehouse, he could see the city lights stretching to the horizon. Millions of people going about their lives, unaware that their entire species was about to face extinction. "Why me?" he asked without turning around. "You could have found someone more qualified, someone with military training or intelligence experience." Because Zara's voice came from directly behind him, though he hadn't heard her approach. "When you found me bleeding and broken in that alley, you did not hesitate. You did not calculate the risks or benefits. You simply acted to help another being in pain. That is the kind of thinking we need to defeat the Dominion." Marcus turned to face her, seeing his own reflection in her alien eyes. "And if we fail, then humanity joins the thousands of other species that exist now only in the Dominion's genetic archives. Their useful traits preserved while their cultures and civilizations are erased forever." The weight of that statement settled over the warehouse like a shroud. Marcus thought about his grandmother in the nursing home, about the barista who had given him free coffee, about Henderson who had fired him for doing the right thing. All of them, everyone he had ever known or would ever know, facing extinction. "What's the first step?" he asked. Zara's expression brightened, and for a moment she looked almost human. "The first step is teaching you to recognize the infiltrators. They are excellent mimics, but they have tells that a trained human I can spot. Tonight, we begin your education." Phillips walked over and handed Marcus a tablet. "This contains everything we know about Dominion psychology, tactics, and technology. Study it. Your life and everyone else's depends on how quickly you can learn." As Marcus took the tablet, he felt the psychic link with Zara strengthen, and suddenly his mind was flooded with images and information. He saw vast ships moving through space, worlds burning under alien weapons, and millions of refugees fleeing across the galaxy. But he also saw something else: hope. Small groups of beings fighting against impossible odds, protecting the innocent, preserving what was worth saving in the universe. "We can do this," he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Humans are good at impossible odds." Zara smiled, the first completely human expression he had seen from her. "That is exactly what I was hoping you would say." 2 weeks into his crash course in alien hunting, Marcus had learned to see his city through completely different eyes. The businessman who never broke stride when walking, whose gait was just slightly too perfect. The restaurant server who never seemed to blink at the right intervals. The city councilman who had started pushing for infrastructure changes that would make civilian evacuation impossible. They were everywhere. Sitting in a coffee shop across from the federal building, Marcus watched his target through the window. Councilman Richard Vale had been exhibiting all the classic signs: too perfect posture, slight hesitation before using human colloquialisms, and, most damning of all, a complete lack of response to the psychic probe Zara had taught him to project. "He's definitely one of them," Marcus murmured into the Bluetooth earpiece that connected him to the Resistance network. "Confirmed," came Zara's voice, transmitted through their psychic link, but routed through human equipment to avoid detection. "Vale has been accelerating the subway tunnel project. Those tunnels will provide perfect staging areas for Dominion forces." Marcus sipped his coffee and continued watching. Vale was meeting with 3 other city officials, all of whom Marcus suspected were also infiltrators. The way they sat was wrong. Too straight, too alert, like predators pretending to be domesticated. "How do we take down a city councilman without raising suspicions?" Marcus asked. "We don't." Agent Phillips's voice crackled through the earpiece. "We expose him. Dr. Vega has developed a compound that will temporarily disrupt their mimicry fields." Over the past 2 weeks, he had learned to move through the city like a ghost, using techniques Zara's people had developed over centuries of resistance fighting. The key was to think like prey while acting like a predator, appear harmless while staying constantly alert for threats. The city council meeting that evening was sparsely attended, which made Marcus's job both easier and harder. Fewer people meant less cover, but it also meant fewer witnesses if something went wrong. He had gotten inside by volunteering to help with the audiovisual setup, a skill he had picked up during his brief stint as a community college student years earlier. As the meeting droned on through routine city business, Marcus positioned himself near the water station where the counselors occasionally came to refill their glasses. The compound Dr. Vega had given him was disguised as a water purification tablet, virtually undetectable unless someone was specifically looking for it. Broadcast hack in position, Phillips's voice whispered through his earpiece. "On your signal." Marcus watched Vale, waiting for the right moment. The councilman was listening to a heated debate about parking regulations with the same intense focus he might apply to military strategy. Every few minutes, his eyes would sweep the room in a pattern that was too systematic to be natural. During a brief recess, Vale stood and walked toward the water station. Marcus's heart rate spiked, but he kept his breathing steady and his movements casual. As Vale reached for the water pitcher, Marcus bumped into him, a clumsy accident that gave him the perfect opportunity to drop the tablet into the pitcher. "Sorry about that," Marcus mumbled, playing the part of an embarrassed volunteer. Vale's response was telling. Instead of the normal human reaction, mild annoyance, a brush off, maybe a comment about watching where he was going, the councilman simply stared at Marcus for a long moment with those two bright eyes before nodding curtly and filling his glass. "Compound delivered," Marcus whispered as he returned to the control booth. The meeting resumed, and Marcus waited. The tablet would take about 15 minutes to take effect, and the disruption would last for 30 seconds. He had one chance to make this count. Broadcasting to emergency network in 3, 2, 1. "We're live," Phillips announced. Across the city, televisions and mobile phones that were tuned to the emergency alert system would suddenly switch to a live feed of the council meeting. Most people would probably change the channel immediately, but some would watch, and some would see what Marcus was about to reveal. Vale was in the middle of explaining why the city needed to fast-track the subway expansion when it happened. At first, it was just a shimmer around the edges of his form, like heat distortion on a hot day. Then his features began to blur and shift. The transformation lasted exactly 30 seconds, but 30 seconds was enough. Vale's human disguise melted away to reveal something that was definitely not terrestrial. His skin became a pale, almost translucent gray. His eyes expanded and darkened, becoming entirely black. Most disturbing of all, his mouth opened to reveal row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. The creature that had been posing as Councilman Vale looked directly at the camera with those black eyes and hissed something in a language that sounded like breaking glass. Then the disguise snapped back into place, and he was human-looking again. But the damage was done. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Two of the other counselors immediately drew concealed weapons. Not human weapons, but sleek alien devices that hummed with energy. The third counselor, apparently human, screamed and fell out of his chair. "Security breach. All units converge on the federal building." Phillips's voice was sharp with excitement and fear. "The cat's out of the bag now. No more hiding." Marcus grabbed the portable camera and kept filming as the infiltrators abandoned their human pretenses entirely. They moved with inhuman speed and coordination, but they had made a critical error. They had revealed themselves in a room full of humans, and humans, Marcus was learning, were very good at adaptation under pressure. The actual human security guards had drawn their weapons and were shouting for backup. The few genuine human counselors were evacuating or taking cover. And across the city, millions of people were watching their worst nightmares come alive on their screens. Phase 1 complete. Zara's voice carried a note of fierce satisfaction. Now they can no longer hide among you. The real war begins. Marcus ducked behind the control booth as energy weapons began firing. Through the chaos, he could hear sirens approaching from every direction. The police might not understand what they were dealing with, but they knew gunfire in the federal building when they heard it. "What's phase 2? Marcus shouted over the noise. Phase 2. Agent Phillips replied grimly, is when they call in the main invasion force early. We just force their hand. The attack on Earth begins tonight. As if summoned by his words, Marcus felt a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Through the windows of the council chamber, the night sky began to glow with unnatural lights. Ships, vast alien vessels that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built, were materializing in the atmosphere above major cities. The invasion had begun 6 weeks ahead of schedule, and thanks to Marcus and a 30-second disruption of alien mimicry technology, humanity would face it with their eyes wide open. Now the real test begins, Zara's voice whispered in his mind. Let us see what humans can do when they fight for their survival with full knowledge of what they face. Marcus looked out at the alien ships hanging over his city like vengeful gods, and felt something he had never experienced before. The absolute clarity that comes when everything you care about is at stake. The unemployed security guard who had helped a stranger in an alley was gone forever. In his place was someone humanity desperately needed, a human who knew exactly what monsters looked like and exactly how to fight them. The war for Earth was about to begin, and Marcus Chun intended to give the aliens a lesson in human unpredictability they would never forget. The massive ships hung over every major city on Earth like mechanical storm clouds, blotting out the stars and casting shadows that seemed to drain hope from the world below. For 3 days, they simply waited, broadcasting demands for unconditional surrender in dozens of human languages. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. Panic, riots, and mass evacuations crippled most governments before a single shot was fired. But Marcus had learned something about humans during those 3 days of terror that even Zara's extensive studies had underestimated. When faced with absolute destruction, humans didn't just fight, they innovated. The Resistance Network has grown to over 50,000 active members in just 72 hours. Agent Phillips reported from the warehouse that had become their primary command center. Your broadcast didn't just expose the infiltrators, it gave people something concrete to fight against. Marcus studied the holographic displays that now covered most of the warehouse floor. Thanks to Zara's technology and the psychic link between them, he could process tactical information at a superhuman rate. The alien knowledge felt strange in his human brain, like wearing clothes that almost fit, but weren't quite made for his body. The Dominion is getting frustrated, Zara observed, her luminescent form flickering slightly with what Marcus had learned was her species' equivalent of anxiety. They expected humanity to surrender within 48 hours. Your resistance is disrupting their timeline. Through their psychic connection, Marcus could feel Zara's amazement at human adaptability. In just 3 days, civilian populations had organized into effective resistance cells. Military units had developed new tactics specifically designed to combat alien technology, and scientists around the world had begun reverse engineering captured alien equipment. They're about to escalate, Marcus said, interpreting the patterns he could see in the alien ship formations. The waiting period is over. As if responding to his words, the ships began to move. Smaller craft detached from the massive vessels like seeds from a dying flower, streaking toward strategic targets across the planet. The invasion had truly begun. All units, this is it. Marcus spoke into the communication network that connected human resistance cells worldwide. Remember, they expect us to fight like every other species they've conquered. Predictable formations, conventional tactics, logical target selection. Don't give them what they expect. The first wave of alien fighters struck military installations with precision that should have been devastating. Should have been, but wasn't because the humans had learned from Zara's intelligence about Dominion tactics. Instead of defending their bases, they had evacuated them and turned them into traps. Detroit reports successful luring of enemy squadron into abandoned Ford plant. Came a report from the Great Lakes Resistance Cell. Improvised explosives and human ingenuity resulted in 17 confirmed enemy craft destroyed. London Cell confirms alien ground forces engaged in subway tunnels. Another voice crackled through. Turns out the tunnels they wanted for staging areas work even better as kill zones when you control both ends. Marcus felt a surge of fierce pride as similar reports flooded in from around the globe. The aliens had studied human military doctrine and prepared for conventional warfare. They had not prepared for construction workers who knew how to collapse buildings on command, farmers who understood how to turn agricultural equipment into weapons, or urban guerrillas who could navigate their own cities better than any invading force ever could. "The Dominion is calling for reinforcements," Zara announced, her expression growing grim. "They are bringing in their veteran units, species that have conquered hundreds of worlds." "Good," Marcus replied, surprising both himself and Zara with his confidence. "Let them bring their best. I want them to understand exactly what they're dealing with." The second wave arrived 6 hours later. Massive transports disgorging alien soldiers that looked like nightmares given physical form. Creatures with natural armor that could shrug off small arms fire. Beings that could phase through solid matter. Predators that could track by scent across vast distances. But the humans were ready for them too. In New York, resistance fighters led alien ground forces through carefully prepared kill zones in the subway system. In Tokyo, civilian volunteers used their intimate knowledge of the city's layout to lead invaders into traps disguised as defensible positions. In Sao Paulo, amateur radio operators coordinated civilian evacuations while simultaneously feeding false information to alien commanders. The key, Marcus realized, was that humans fought like humans. They didn't try to be soldiers when they were plumbers, teachers, or shop owners. They used the skills they already had in ways the aliens couldn't predict or counter. "Zara," Marcus said during a brief lull in the fighting, "show me the Dominion's command structure." The holographic display shifted to show the alien fleet's organization. Marcus studied it for several minutes, noting patterns that felt wrong. "They're fighting like they always fight," he said finally. "Top-down command structure, rigid hierarchy, predetermined responses to specific threats." "Yes," Zara agreed. "It is an effective system that has served them well for conquering species that fight like them," Marcus interrupted. "But what happens when you're fighting an entire species that thinks like individuals?" He turned to address the room full of human and alien resistance fighters. "We've been responding to their attacks, playing defense. Time to show them something they've never seen before." Over the next 12 hours, Marcus coordinated the most audacious military operation in human history. Instead of fighting a traditional war, human resistance cells began behaving like a single, massive guerrilla force. They struck simultaneously at targets the aliens had never thought to defend, using tactics that violated everything the Dominion understood about warfare. In orbit, the massive command ships found themselves under attack by retrofitted civilian aircraft carrying improvised weapons designed by high school science teachers and garage inventors. On the ground, alien soldiers discovered that humans could turn anything into a weapon, from city buses to garden sprinkler systems. But the most devastating blow came from something purely human: the ability to inspire hope in the face of certain death. All resistance cells, this is Marcus Chun. He broadcast on every frequency the network controlled. "I want everyone listening to remember something. 3 weeks ago, I was unemployed, broke, and convinced that doing the right thing was a luxury I couldn't afford. Today, I'm helping coordinate the defense of our entire species." His voice carried across the globe, reaching huddled families in bomb shelters, exhausted soldiers in destroyed cities, and terrified civilians who thought the world was ending. The aliens studied us for decades, trying to understand what makes humans tick. They cataloged our weapons, analyzed our tactics, and calculated our weaknesses. But they missed the most important thing about us. We're at our best when everything seems hopeless. Through the psychic link, Marcus felt Zara's amazement as she processed what she was witnessing. The human resistance wasn't just fighting back. It was growing stronger under pressure, adapting faster than the Dominion could respond. "The ships are withdrawing," Agent Phillips announced, his voice filled with disbelief. "All of them. They're pulling back to orbit." Marcus felt the Dominion commander's confusion through intercepted communications that Zara translated in real time. The aliens had expected a 2-day conquest. They had been fighting for 6 days and were no closer to victory than when they started. Worse, human resistance was actually increasing as more civilians joined the fight. They're requesting additional reinforcements, Zara reported. The entire sector fleet. They are committing resources to conquering Earth that they had planned to use for 3 other campaigns. Marcus smiled, understanding something that the Dominion leadership was only beginning to grasp. They think this is about conquering one world. They don't realize they're fighting to prove whether humanity deserves to exist in their universe. The final message came 18 hours later, broadcast from the command ship in perfect, unaccented English. Humans of Earth, your resistance has exceeded all projections. The Dominion Council has voted to withdraw invasion forces and declare your species worthy of independent existence. You will be granted protected status and offered membership in the Galactic Resistance Coalition. Marcus looked around the warehouse at the exhausted faces of humans and aliens who had fought together to save a world. Through the psychic link, he felt Zara's deep satisfaction and something else. Hope for a universe where beings could choose cooperation over conquest. Not bad for an unemployed security guard, Agent Phillips said with a tired grin. Marcus thought about the woman he had found bleeding in an alley, the simple act of kindness that had started everything. Sometimes the smallest choices led to the greatest changes. Sometimes losing your job was the first step toward finding your purpose. So what happens now? He asked Zara. Now, she replied, humanity joins the larger fight. There are other worlds under threat, other species that need the kind of hope you showed here. The galaxy is vast, and there's much work to be done. Marcus looked out through the warehouse windows at a city that would rebuild, at a sky that was once again free of alien warships, at a world that had earned its place among the stars through courage, ingenuity, and the simple human refusal to give up when everything seemed lost. He had lost his job helping a fallen alien lady. But fate, it turned out, had much bigger plans for both of them.